Something is just not right with these numbers by Spotify. How come Meghan Markle's podcast is #1 over Joe Rogan's? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy. And it would be great if you join us by just liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that bell. Let's get down to it. And yes, this is nothing but a mystery. How well is Meghan Markle's podcast really doing? Mystery, as Spotify declares Archetype's top podcasts in official rankings, despite their episode listening figures putting her no higher than 5th and as low as 25th. Maybe you could add this to the long list of the Duchess SHADY shenanigans. Duchess of Sussex New Archetypes Project is the #1 podcast in all Spotify's English-speaking markets, and not only English-speaking markets, you're gonna see. But show is no higher than 5 and as low as 25 in terms of listeners in same nations, Spotify's own data shows. Joe Rogan and other podcasters are ahead of the Duchess of Sussex based on unique listeners on that day. Industry figures say Spotify will be keen for Archetypes to be seen as a success after cost of deal with couple. Yeah, the £18 million. Subscribers have accused the company of massaging its figures or even manipulating its main chart to keep the California-based royal at the top. Now, what's important here is figure out what do these charts mean? How does Spotify make the calculations about all these podcasters and all these episodes to say who's better than who? And here is the podcast chart. According to Spotify's website, Top Podcasts is where you'll find the overall most popular shows, ones fans have been listening to for some time, and rising newcomers. It's determined by a combination of overall follower counts and the number of recent unique listeners. When they talk about unique listeners, it's like you listen to this video or watch this video of the body language guy twice, but you are counted as just one unique listener. This suggests that the chart is compiled by a number of measures, not just listener numbers. A show could have more subscribers than listeners, for example, or could be promoted because it is a new release. Now, in regards to the episodes themselves, the individual episodes of each podcast, Spotify says, top episodes is where you'll find of-the-moment trends in what people are listening to today. This chart is determined exclusively by the number of unique listeners on that day, providing a look into what's buzzworthy at the moment. This suggests that this is the most accurate gauge of listener numbers. Now, people are weighing in those contradictions, and everything is very shady. And you know that when it comes to Meghan Markle, well, shady is something not far off from where she is acting. Joe R has the top 3 episode spots constantly. She has not even made it in the top 5. Yet we are supposed to believe she is the #1 podcast. Make it make sense. It doesn't because it's manipulated, says Severa Lawn on Twitter. I can't expect that they'd be pushing it as #1 when it really isn't. They paid $18 million for a mediocre podcast and won't bang for their buck, says Kay on Twitter too. Now, how does Spotify really make that bang for their buck? Well, in the US, Archetypes is ranked at #1 in the podcast chart despite her new episode with Mariah Carey released on Tuesday, sitting at 12 in the episodes chart, while the Duchess' first show with Serena Williams dropped at 25. Spotify's own data shows that more British listeners are tuning on to Road. By the way, you remember that Mariah called Meghan a diva, right? And Meghan was upset by that, even angry at the possibility of she being one. How dare you, Mariah? So then we have this tweet from her that is some sort of damage control, I guess. Really enjoy talking to Duchess and Diva Meghan Markle about the duality of diva. Yes, I call her a diva in the most fabulous, gorgeous, and empowering meaning of the word. Archetypes. You seen the hashtag on Twitter? Yeah, that's PR agency stuff. And I've said this many times, and I tell you this, Mariah. You never explain yourself, much less when you mean what you just said. Well, another listener said, if Spotify are fudging the charts, I'd be pissed off. In Germany, it is the number 10 in its podcast chart, but does not have a single episode in its top 100. What? How this works? I don't understand. In France, Archetypes is number 2 in the podcast charts, but the episodes are at 34 and 62. In Norway, Archetypes is at number 3 in the podcast chart, but its Mariah Carey episode released this week is the 89th most listened to episode today. Her chat with Serena is not in the top 100 at all. It is a similar picture in all the Nordic countries and across Europe. So what is the explanation to this? Industry insiders have suggested that Spotify may have chosen to keep Archetypes at the top of its charts, especially given the reputed 18 million deal handed to the Sussexes for content. One broadcasting expert with decades of experience in the industry told Mail Online, the main Spotify podcast ranking does allow them to promote their new shows, and they could be doing this for Meghan. Based on the figures, you would think Joe Rogan would be number 1. That makes sense. Or maybe people is attracted for that spontaneous image of, that spontaneous hair, spontaneous tank top, and spontaneous black and white photo of Meghan looking straight into the camera and luring people into listening to her podcast. What do you think? By the way, the comments on that article are extremely representative of the general public's opinion. Everything she says, everything she does, and everything she is fake. Of course, they will declare her number 1. They have invested heavily and will need to really pump up the publicity to see even the smallest return. It won't happen. They were sold a dud, but bless them for trying. It was more than 4,000 likes. This is why she pays her PR millions. Fake views, fake reviews, fake likes. And if you believe more people listen to this drivel than to Joe Rogan, you are delusional. Now, what if this is not Spotify's fault? I saw this article in Lunio about the rise of Spotify streaming farms, how fraudsters are cashing in, and there's a very interesting section that explains what are streaming farms. These are a relatively new concept and were created to specifically take advantage of streaming platforms like Spotify. Similar to the likes of click farms, where robots or workers artificially inflate social media metrics, such as likes and follows, streaming farms artificially inflate the number of listens of a song, or in this case, a podcast. The most surprising thing about streaming farms is that you know what you are doing. They are relatively easy to make. In an article by Vice, one of their journalists, William Bedell, managed to create his own streaming farm that simulated thousands of fake listeners. To our knowledge, William is not some elite underground hacker that is used to making things like this. So this goes to show just how easy it is. So it means that even Harry could do this. What's even more strange that this is not limited to English-speaking countries. As Glenn Atherton brought to our attention on Twitter, number 1 in every English-speaking market, and now India, one area that Western podcasts tend not to do so well, and all that, and no Hindi translation. Amazing, really. Surely it can't be manipulation? That would be worrying. Now, it's also interesting that there's this article on Anchor.fm, which is a subsidiary of Spotify, where you can host your podcast, and most probably I'll be hosting my podcast there, where they had this article from 2020 explaining the new, back then in 2020, the new charts of podcasts, or the new podcast charts, and they were divided in two. One, top podcasts were the ones who were the most popular, and the second, trending podcasts that were suddenly like with a renewed influx of listeners at that moment, like what was trendy. That would actually make sense. It's not that Arsewipes will be on the top podcasts, but very well be on the trending podcasts, because it's a new podcast, it's just rising, there's a lot of new listeners, it has a lot of unique listeners, so it could be trending. That's okay. But no, they had to go for the full enchilada and claim the number 1 spot, affirming that it is more popular than Joe Rogan's podcast, one that Spotify signed a deal with him of $100 million to secure the exclusive content. Now, I have a question that is food for thought. Whether it's Joe Rogan's podcast or Arswipe's podcast, the CEO has always a responsibility on this, on what are the decisions of the company, and such a big decisions are on his shoulders. At the moment, Daniel Ek is Spotify's CEO, and I don't know how much agency he had on those decisions, especially on Arswipe's, but you can imagine that if Spotify's shares have fallen in the past 12 months from a high of $300 per share to around $100 per share, it's almost like a cataclysmic fall, like almost every other technology share. They are desperate to affirm that they are doing things right. And if they signed a multi-million-dollar deal with the Harkles, it would not look good when they finally release that podcast that it will be a dud. That would be devastating to the perception of the company. So at all costs, at this moment, they have to make sure that the public sees Spotify as a company that knows what they are doing, that the 18 million was well invested, that this is just a temporary thing, and they're going to go up anytime soon, and they make sound decisions, including hiring the Harkles to do Arswipes because it's trending at number 1. Don't you think that it's in their best interest to make this facade and save face, at least, until people realize that what Arswipes is all about? It's like Occam's razor. Sometimes the easiest, most simple answer is usually the right one. My body language buddies, my name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and until we meet again in another video or another live, remember to download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. Much love and bliss.